So now that we're fast approaching the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees Aries, the one that we've all been waiting for, it happens just 3 days after the eclipse next week on Friday. I put out a video about the eclipse. You should watch it. I'll link it below. But this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is starting a whole new cycle. And I wanted to talk about this cycle in relationship to other cycles and how this cycle is bringing us into a transitional period. And I wanted to talk about it from the perspective of the founder of human design, because we're also entering into a new cross, which is kind of what we've all been experiencing. It is a transitional period between cycles. It's called the cross of the sleeping phoenix. And we're supposed to be entering into it in 2027. But the Saturn-Neptune conjunction happens on this cross. And so I think it's giving us a taste of what's to come. Not that we haven't been getting a taste of this all year, because Saturn and Neptune have been dancing together. They've already entered Aries once last year, but now they're moving permanently into Aries. And I wanted to look at it from that perspective, as well as this perspective of the changing of seasons. We can go back in time and look at a prior cycle, the age of copper, also a transitional period. And it was a movement between the age of Gemini into the age of Taurus. And now we're at a square relationship to that age. And we're repeating that Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries. We're in between cycles, in large cycles. We're still at the edge of the age of Pisces, and we're moving into the age of Aquarius, but we're in a transition. I'm going to talk about it from that perspective, as well as the perspective of the Yuga cycle. So there are many different ways to look at this, and they're all pointing to pretty much the same thing, although some takes are more positive than others. And I want to look at all of the perspectives, because we want to be prepared for what's coming, but we also don't want to lose hope of how we can respond in this moment. But first, I want to take a look at a clip. I'm going to play a couple of his clips. This is from Gordon from Rune Soup. The entire episode is great. I'll link that below in case you want to check it out. And I'm also including timestamps below in case you want to skip around to what interests you the most. Okay, here's the clip.
But this moment is being composted. This is the end of the West. And it's not Epstein caused the end of the West. It's this is the end of the outbreath of an imperial model, because they all end in total corruption.
Okay, that wasn't so hopeful, but he's describing what's happening. And we're seeing this happen in real time. We are at the end of the dominance of the West. We're experiencing the last sputter, the last fight for dominance, and we're going to continue to experience that. Now, where his positive perspective comes in is in this next clip. It talks about how we can zoom out and look at it from a higher perspective in order to survive this time. He also talks about the Great Turning, which is basically describing the astrological seasons.
So I said, get The Fourth Turning is Here by Neil Howe, which is the update of the famous The Fourth Turning. And it's astrology, and we're in the end of it. There's no fixing this, right? So it's not... That information is very useful to you when it comes to choosing what level of reactivity you are after, what reactivity is called for in this moment. Flatland is the pedo elites. Spaceland is the total corruption that putrefies and collapses this phase of Western civilization. And that's what the model's good for. The model is good for sense-making at the level up. Now, that doesn't mean I guess so we just don't have to care about it. It's just, this is just what happens. It's like, no. That is a meditation bell. Whenever you feel the call to reactivity, which is very understandable, that's a meditation bell.
So basically what he's saying is that we cannot control the ending of the West and this ending or this transitional period as we're ending one cycle and going into another, but we can control how we respond. We can take a step back and we can respond from a higher level. We can contribute in a way that is more positive, and it helps us change the perspective of the ending of this cycle, and in that sense contributes to the overall cycle if we are playing the role that we're meant to play and we're doing it from a higher perspective. Now, I want to play another clip. This is a clip from Alexander Stubb. He is a leader of Finland. And he talks also about the Saturn-Neptune cycle, although he doesn't refer to it specifically. He talks about the time periods of this changing New World Order, which pretty much matches up, not exactly, but matches up to the Saturn-Neptune cycles. And he talks about the decline of the West as well. But he talks about how the West can focus on its values and make decisions about empowering the South, which I thought is interesting. It's not specifically the North versus South of the equator, but he talks about the South. And if we empower the South and give them more agency, we may be able to create a world that is not transactional the way that it's heading now, but is multilateral and pays a closer attention to focusing on our values. And so I thought that was a great way to look at it. And in the larger scheme of things, when we're thinking about, the negative turns versus positive turns, I would root for this turn myself. And that's the energy that I'm going to focus in on. How do we create this world? How do we encourage our leaders to give more agency to other countries and open it up so that we have equality for more people? And what I thought was interesting about that is, this whole Pluto going out of bounds to the south. And even though it's not a one-to-one match, it's really interesting to think of this agency to the South in general. So I'm going to play that clip right now.
In summary, you could say that the big argument is that for us, this is the 1918, 1945 or 1989 moment of our generation. It's a moment when the world order balance and dynamics are changing. Sometimes they happen after wars, like after World War I, World War II, or sometimes after periods such as the Cold War. And we're sort of somewhere in between. And we know that orders usually last, or at least have in the past century, 20 years, as they did after World War I, 40 years as it did after World War II, or 30 years as it did after the Cold War. And what initiated the change in the current liberal world order, I would argue, was Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. So we're talking February 2022. I fully realize that this is a rather Western perspective of looking at things, but I admit fully in the book as well that my identity is Finnish, Nordic, European, transatlantic. So I look at my analysis looks a lot through that lens. And of course, it has now been accelerated, this change and transformation with the new U.S. administration. And the triangle of power for me is the global West, which used to be led, at least by the United States, trying to preserve the current liberal order. The global East, led by China, which was more supporting multipolarity and a new order. and then the global south, which unfairly I lump 125 countries into. But for me, that is the area and entities of the world that will actually decide what the next order looks like. And of course, now things move quite fast. I think the thesis still holds. But my big idea is that you kind of have a choice, which is fairly binary, but probably it's gonna land somewhere in between. You have those who support multipolarity, which is about transaction and deals and actually spheres of interest, so not far from what we saw in the 19th century. And then you have those who support multilateralism, which is about international institutions, it's about rule of law, it's about norms, and basically the liberal world order that existed. And my final point, if we want to preserve the liberal world order, we need to give agency to those countries around the world which feel that the current order was built 80 years ago in the image of the West and especially the United States. So give more power to the rest of the world, because I still think that there are more multilateralists in this world than there are transactionalists. So this is the big idea of the book, and in many ways a defense of the liberal world order and of course of open societies as well.
The founder of human design, Rune, talks about these cycles and the movement from the cross of planning, which began in 1615 with the age of Kepler and Descartes, to the cross of the sleeping phoenix. And that's beginning in 2027. But with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, we're getting a little bit of a taste before this transition, because it's also on the cross of the sleeping phoenix. And the age of Kepler and Descartes marked the seismic shift from the medieval worldview to the scientific revolution. It was an era where the mystical began to shake hands with the mathematical, leading to a brand new way of understanding reality. This age includes the era of Darwin versus Durant, which began in 1861. And this is the struggle to define whether humanity is ruled by the law of the jungle or a law of mercy. And you see that we're all starting to grapple with all of this right now as we are seeing this background frequency start to shift. And, the cross of planning is very much what it sounds like. It brought us a lot of collective planning. It brought us a lot of our modern institutions, our democratic institutions, organized communities, and our secular knowledge. We all committed to investing in this way of life because we knew that it was going to benefit us all. And so we had, as a collective, a commitment to it. And that bargain made it possible to organize everyone into these great megaplexes. And now we're seeing this cycle start to break down. And the cross of the sleeping phoenix is a time of transition. And I'll talk about that in a minute from the larger cycle perspective, because it puts this time period in perspective and it gives us a backdrop of what we can expect. We're starting to feel it already, but it's deeply individual. It's a shift from entrusting or committing to an external authority to needing to rely on our own internal authority. And that's why Rune came up with these strategies. One could say it's a mental strategy, but to be able to identify in our body, what is our form strength to help us make decisions in a world that's changing when we cannot trust an external authority, which we've trusted on for so long. So how do we rely on our own internal compass? And the ways that he brought this decision making, or a practice of decision making, was to, okay, well, what type are you? And that's going to determine how you should respond or how you should be invited. And then also, how do you best make decisions? Like, I'm an emotional decision maker. And so, the strategy for an emotional decision maker is to wait and to really get all of the nuances of your emotion in, and to not make a decision based on the high or low of the wave. So really getting to know ourselves and how we operate from an individual level, so that we could trust our decision making when, all of the ways that we've been relying on how to make decisions is in flux, and we can't even believe our eyes anymore, because everything that's put out into the world is manipulating us. So I think that's why he really focused on, okay, well, how do I give people the tools to better understand how they operate, so that they can move into this time without getting pulled into the manipulations. But it's becoming harder and harder not to be manipulated by all of the information that's coming at us at any given day. So, there's a larger shift happening, and I wanted to spend a moment on the precession of the equinoxes, because it is related to the movement of this cycle. And I think it'll help us really understand what that movement is going to look like.
Precessional slippage, also called the precession of the equinox, is a phenomenon in astronomy caused by the gradual wobbling of the Earth's axis. The orientation of the Earth's axis, looking northward from the Earth, roughly points to the star Polaris. Due to this wobbling phenomenon, the Earth's axis will eventually point towards a different star.
When I saw this video by Olga Morales, she's a great astrologer. I highly recommend her content. She was explaining the precession and the change of seasons between the ages. And when she started to explain this, it was like a light bulb went off. And I finally understood this concept of the 88 degrees, which is the measurement of the design date before we were born. And she describes it as this change of seasons when she compares this age to the age that is very similar to this age we're in a square relationship to. And it's almost like our personality is our personal precession movement. And I'm still contemplating that.
We're here, 2026, okay? On the 20th of February, Saturn and Neptune would be conjunct at 0 degrees of Aries, okay? But in 4361 BC, that's the date, they were also together at 0 degrees of Aries, even closer to the Aries point. Okay, so we've got the same planets, the same point, but everything's shifted. So the stars behind them have moved an entire season. Now, what's a season? A season is a quarter. Every seasons are 90 degrees, 90 days, okay? So what I'm saying is that if we look at when it 4361 BC, you can see that on the Aries point, which is our equinox point, the fixed star called Betelgeuse, in Orion is actually rising at the equinoxes. This is the time of Orion being on the equinox, okay? And I want you to focus on this fixed star. It's called Sheet, but it sounds like sheet, but it's the beta star in the flying horse in Pegasus here in his leg, okay? And at the time, it was at 1 degree of Capricorn, okay? But now, all this time after 6,000 years and a bit, it's actually at almost 0 degrees of Aries. It's at 2944 of Pisces. Again, this fixed star will move into 0 degrees of Aries, all right? And that would have completed the whole 90 degrees. Can you see it's moved 90 this whole quarter of the circle is 90 days, can be 90 years, or it can be a quarter of the great year. So in 6,387 years, it's roughly 88 degrees. So it's almost a 90-degree seasonal shift.
And in 4,361 BC, the world was in the Copper Age. And this was a pivotal era when humanity was transitioning from stone tools to the early stages of metallurgy. This is when the world begins to run like a machine. Measurement begins during this period. This transition gave birth to social hierarchies. It was a movement between egalitarian tribal existence toward the rise of the monarchy. And it was the final transition between the age of Gemini before the age of Taurus. And we are at a similar transition between the age of Pisces moving into the age of Aquarius. The previous transition was from air to earth, and now we are moving from water to air. And it shifts how humanity relates to reality. Gemini is mutable air. It's the sign of communication, duality, and the twin. This was a time of nomadic movement, the development of basic language, and the brother versus brother tribal skirmishes. People were learning to label the world during this time, but as we hit the 4000s BC, the energy became Taurian, or fixed earth. This is when we see the literal worship of the bull and the rise of heavy agriculture. Gemini is light and mobile. Taurus is heavy and settled. In 4,361 BC, people stopped just talking about things and started owning them. This is why we see the first permanent cities and the hoarding of copper and gold. It was a shift from nomadic curiosity to material security. Humanity decided to stop wondering and start building a house on Earth. So now we are transitioning from the last degrees of the Pisces Age to the Aquarius Age, which will likely take many more years. Some suggest that this transition is around 2100 AD, so most of us will not live to see the actual shift, even though we have started to feel the shift. And as we get closer, that shift will start to feel much stronger. Pisces is mutable water. It's the sign of religion, sacrifice, the savior, and hidden depths. For 2,000 years, power was held by those who controlled the truth or faith. It was a vertical age, God above and humans below. Aquarius is fixed air. It is the sign of the collective, technology, rebellion, and the water bearer. The water bearer symbolizes those who pour knowledge out for everyone and not just the elite. So it could symbolize things like AI. While Pisces was about the institution, the church, the empire, Aquarius is about the network, the internet, the decentralized group. It can also include the network state or tech feudalism. Pisces asks you to sacrifice yourself for the whole, while Aquarius asks you to be a unique individual who contributes to the whole. On the negative side, Aquarius can also lack empathy, be utilitarian in its approach, and can lean into authoritarianism if the ends justify the means. In the Aquarian Age, we are shifting from faith and belief toward an inner knowing. It's a little bit like the movement from theist to anti-theist in human design. Theist motivation is all about faith in something external, where anti-theist motivation is about having an internal faith, knowing that you are part of the whole and what happens to you is part of a larger design. It's also interesting to understand what's happening today as compared to what happened during the Copper Age. Archaeologists have recently noted that the ox-drawn plow was the robot of the Copper Age. Before the plow, farming was done by hand with hoes. Everyone worked the same, so everyone was equal. Once the plow arrived, one person with an ox could do the work of 10. Wealth decoupled from labor. Suddenly, if you owned the tech or the ox and the land, you became a chief. The tribe was left behind. We are seeing the same decoupling today. Wealth is moving away from human labor and toward those who own the compute and the data. Early democracies and tribes thrived because they were illegible to rulers. It was hard to track what everyone was doing, so it was hard to control them. The rise of copper and large-scale farming required accounting. For the first time, leaders could see exactly how much grain a family had. The legibility allowed for taxation and the birth of a ruling bureaucracy. And now digital technology has made our lives perfectly legible to both corporations and states. Every transaction, thought, and movement is tracked. This reduces the information advantage that citizens once had over their rulers, the very advantage that makes democracy possible. There's also a similar shift into strongman posturing during this time. 4361 BC was the era where big men were becoming chiefs. They started building fortifications and hoarding copper weapons. They moved away from the consensus of the tribe towards centralized command. Today, we see a move away from consensus politics or democracy towards strongman politics or authoritarianism. In times of rapid technological change, people often trade their voice for the perceived security of a leader who promises to master the new scary world for them. In both cases, technology is centralizing in nature. Copper required mines and furnaces controlled by a few. AI requires massive data centers and energy controlled by a few. When the tools of survival are no longer in the hands of the many, the politics of the many begins to wither. In both eras, the defining technology of the age is entirely dependent on minerals that aren't evenly distributed across the planet. This creates a resources trap. If you want the high-tech tools of your era, you have to control the dirt they come from. It is poetic irony that copper, the very metal that defined the starting point of 4361 BC, is once again the center of a global struggle. Copper was the high-tech material for the first metal axes and jewelry, and now copper is the nerve system of the digital age. It is essential for AI data centers, electric vehicle motors, and the renewable energy grid. We're seeing a scramble for copper that mirrors the ancient search for ore. Our high-tech world depends on specific minerals that are concentrated in few places, like China, the Congo, and Chile. We are currently searching for our iron, the abundant alternative. The lesson of 4361 BC is that when a resource becomes a trap for power, the next age usually arrives by finding a way to use something that is too common for anyone to hoard. And this urgency for resource innovation may very well be what saves us in the end. Because in the search for minerals or in the experimentation of synthetics, we may experience a breakthrough that saves our lives from the current climate collapse we are heading into. Because our timelines are now condensed, some futurists predict our current peak resource trap will only last until 2030. From 2026 to 2030, we will likely continue fighting over lithium, copper, and chips. This is our late Bronze Age moment. High tension, high dependency. Between 2030 and 2040, we experience a material breakthrough. Something like scalable sodium-ion batteries and graphene replace the need for rare minerals. Energy becomes abundant through fusion or ultra-cheap solar. And they predict that 2040 and beyond is the post-material age, where we solve the resource trap by moving into the age of synthetic abundance. Another positive to this time period is that we now live in a circular economy. In the Copper Age, if you ran out of copper, you had to find a new mine or take one from your neighbor. And today we are realizing that our waste, like old phones and laptops and batteries, contain more concentrated minerals in the earth itself. Comparing 4361 BC to 2026 AD reveals a hauntingly similar pattern. Both eras represent a moment where a radical new technology, copper then, AI data now, essentially broke the old way of organizing society. In the Copper Age, the old way was the egalitarian tribe. Today, the old way is liberal democracy. But this doesn't necessarily mean we will revert back to a monarchist rule or an authoritarian rule. It's likely to be something entirely different. The cross of the sleeping phoenix does carry the themes of material ambition and selfishness, but it doesn't necessarily have to lead to oligarchic rule. And if it does, it most certainly will not last. This time is transitory. It's a time of great possibility, and it's likely to empower creativity and experimentation. So let's briefly talk about the yugas. This is where history, science, and ancient philosophy collide in a really fascinating way. The Yuga system from Hindu cosmology is perhaps the oldest ages model in the world. And many people have noticed that its transition dates align eerily well with both archaeological shifts and our current digital chaos. While traditional interpretations say we're in a massive 432,000 year dark age called the Kali Yuga, the yogi Sri Yukswar and later Yogananda proposed a much more human-scale timeline in the book Holy Science. He argued that the Yuga cycle is 24,000 years long based on the precession of the equinoxes. In his model, the descending Kali Yuga, the low point, occurred around 500 AD to 1700 AD. This was the peak of materialism and the loss of subtle knowledge. The current age is called Dwapara Yuga, and we entered this age of energy around 1700 AD to 1900 AD. This is the age where we stop seeing the world as just solid matter and start seeing it as energy and information. If we look at the Yuga cycles, the era of 4361 BC falls right in the middle of the descending Dwapara Yuga, or the age of energy. In this model, Dwapara is the age of understanding the atomic nature of things. Humans were literally breaking apart rocks or ore to extract the energy or the metals inside. We were moving from using things as they were, stone, to transforming them into copper. As we move toward 3102 BC, the traditional start of the Kali Yuga, humanity experienced the fall. It began to lose its spiritual connection and became more obsessed with physical ownership, exactly when we see the rise of the first massive war-heavy empires. Many modern researchers like Bibhu Dev Misra and Graham Hancock suggest that 2025 to 2026 is a major cusp, or Sandy, a transitional junction in the Yuga cycle. Some believe we're finally shaking off the residue of the dark Kali Yuga. This is why the world feels so polarized right now. We have one foot in the old Kali systems, centralized power, fossil fuels, material greed, and one foot in the Dwapara system, where there's decentralized tech, renewable energy, and AI. In Vedic astrology, 2026 is viewed as a turning point where old structures begin to dissolve to make room for a new level of consciousness. This matches the intelligence age transition, the shift from humans doing the work to humans directing the intelligence of the universe. The Yuga theory suggests that human intelligence isn't just a flat line, it's like a season. Just as the Precession cycle suggests, we are currently in the springtime of a new age. If we are moving into a higher Yuga, the walls we discussed, energy, scaling, social friction, aren't dead ends. They're just the labor pains of a world that is outgrowing its old material skin. From a human design perspective, the cross of the sleeping phoenix also holds the possibility of waking up, being free from illusions, and living authentically according to a deep self-understanding and self-mastery. Learning to live as individuals within a community over shared values and leading by example. We may need to live existentially for a while, and while this can be stressful, it can also open up the possibility for universal love in the world. This is the real surrender. Not my will be done, but thy will be done. This is just to be here in the moment, in the wave, as Ra calls it. Well, I hope understanding these larger cycles is helpful. it's helpful for me to take myself out of the everyday madness. It's like that meditation bell that Gordon was referring to. But I have to admit, I still get caught up in the madness and I want it to all go away. But there's a part of me that's kind of excited for what's around the corner. And I'm hoping that we have better leadership in the future. So drop me a line. I really want to know how this content is resonating with you. I have so much content that I want to share. So much is going on, and I just don't have all of the time to share it. So I'd love to hear from you. Okay, until next time, talk to you later. Bye.